Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about Shakespeare's Othello, one of his great tragedies. This play centers on an interracial marriage that is ultimately destroyed by jealousy and manipulation. It's got one of Shakespeare's truest and purest heroes, as well as Shakespeare's absolutely most vile villain, Iago. Seriously, in many of Shakespeare's plays, his villains have good qualities, but in Othello, Iago is just pure evil. He finds delight in manipulating and abusing people. It's all a wild, complex game to him. And although he keeps muttering different reasons for his abuses of the other characters, none of them really rings true. It's almost as if he's casually trying on excuses for his treatment of Othello and Desdemona and Cassio. But none of them really explains his desire to destroy the sweet and innocent Desdemona. And even his excuses to hurt Othello ring pretty hollow. He doesn't even fully believe some of them. In this video, we're going to outline and discuss Act 1. In a traditional Shakespearean plot, we expect Act 1 to be exposition, introducing our main characters, our setting, and our conflict. Othello actually has a pretty light cast for a Shakespeare play. Some of his plays have many roles, but this one has very few. And yet those few characters are thoroughly defined and developed in this story. So our play opens just after Othello has married Desdemona. Othello is the Moor of Venice. He is a black man who is serving as a military leader for Venice. In Shakespeare, marriages are hugely celebrated and often fall at key moments in his plays. In the comedies, almost every comedy ends with a marriage. You might remember the marriage in Act 2 of Romeo and Juliet, ending the idyllic first half, before the second half turns things pretty dark. And Othello begins with a marriage, but instead of witnessing this marriage and the love between these two characters, we start with a vision of those characters who are challenging the marriage. The play opens with Roderigo and Iago. Roderigo is a gullible gentleman of Venice who has been attempting to get Desdemona's hand for a while. Iago is an ensign in the military, an ancient. We find out immediately that Iago has been using Roderigo for his purse. And the two of them, upon finding out that Othello has married Desdemona, have gone to stir up trouble with Desdemona's father. Roderigo is of course upset because he wanted Desdemona for himself, but Iago is angry simply because he hates Othello. And Iago gives his first reason for hating Othello in the very first page of the play. 3 great winds of the city, in personal suit to make me his lieutenant, off cap to him, and by the faith of man I know my price, I am worth no worse a place. But he, as loving his own pride and purposes, evades them with a bombast circumstance, horribly stuffed with epithets of war, and in conclusion, none suits my mediators, for, "Certes," says he, "I have already chose my officer." And what was he? Forsooth, a great arithmetician, one Michael Cassio, a Florentine. Iago's angry because Othello, the general, has passed him over for promotion and instead put Michael Cassio, a man who is much more learned in books than he is in military service, into the best place of lieutenant. Iago's not having it. And it's Iago's jealousy here that perhaps gets him started on the road to destroy Othello. And this might be an elaborate enough reason for Iago to pursue this destruction. However, since Iago tries on several other excuses for his anger and hatred, and since Iago seems to just enjoy his evil so much, it's hard to feel like this is an adequate excuse. They're not content to be angry with Othello simply for the snub that he gave to Iago. They also blast him for his race. Roderigo suggests that he would rather have him hanged. A moment later calls him the thick lips. And Iago certainly enjoys knocking at the father's door to stir him up and tell him the story of how his daughter has run off with a black man. Call up her father, rouse him, make after him, poison his delight, proclaim him in the streets, incense her kinsman, and though he in a fertile climate dwell, plague him with flies. Though that his joy be joy, yet throw such changes of vexation on it, as it may lose some colour. Iago, banging on the door, shouts, "Thieves! Thieves! Thieves! Look to your house, your daughter, and your bags! Thieves! Thieves!" Iago is very crass in his treatment of both women and money in this book. Both of them are obsessions for him. His crude references to sexuality and to lust over and over again show how base his mind is. And his continual manipulation of people around him for money especially Roderigo, demonstrates that he feels that people and things around him are all his to be used. Brabantio sticks his head out of the window and tries to get them to leave, and when he finds out that it's Roderigo, he points out his disgust at him. Brabantio has told off Roderigo several times for approaching his daughter, but Iago manages to stir Brabantio up by using really crass language about what his daughter is doing with Othello. An old black ram is tupping your white ewe. You'll have your daughter covered with a Barbary horse. You'll have your nephews neigh to you. You'll have corsairs for cousins and jennets for Germans. And his language gets even more intense from there. Notice the number of times that Iago uses animal imagery to describe people he hates. Instead of seeing the love between Othello and Desdemona, he colors everything with animal instinct and bestiality. It's unnatural for a black man and a white girl to get together. Roderigo also highlights the disgust against interracial marriage in Venice, talking about the gross clasps of the lascivious Moor. At the same time, he talks about the daughter having made a gross revolt. The word gross in Shakespeare's day meant huge or large, but as today, there's also something unwieldy and unpleasant, definitely a negative connotation. When Brabantio does check his daughter's room and finds she's no longer there, he realizes that Roderigo actually has a point. Iago slips off into the night so as not to be identified as part of this party. And Brabantio, who just a moment ago was talking about how much he hated Roderigo and how much he would hate to have him as a son-in-law, suddenly says he would much rather have him as a son-in-law than the Moor. He says, "Oh, would you had had her!" And so trouble is stirred up. We cut to Othello speaking with, none other than Iago. And here Iago is talking to Othello about how concerned he is that Othello is going to get in trouble with Brabantio, who's a senator and has a lot of power in town. Fortunately, Othello has a lot of clout too. He is their great general and winning great wars for them. Not only that, but as the Turks are just coming in to invade, Othello is being summoned to war. They need him and they don't want to throw him in jail over this little petty squabble. Othello says, "Let him do his spite. My services which I have done the Signory shall out-tongue his complaints." Some officers come with Cassio and tell Othello that he's being summoned and they need to go immediately. There is some news from Cyprus. But just at that moment, Brabantio and his men show up, and both parties begin to draw their swords until Othello tells them to stop. "Keep up your bright swords, for the dew will rust them." Though Brabantio charges him, Othello manages to call off the fight. It's interesting because there are echoes of a Christ figure here. We might remember the night of Christ's betrayal. In comes the army marching to meet him and the betrayer, and up steps Peter with his sword. And Christ tells them not to fight, to put away their swords. Othello has a similar gesture, which begins to make us feel his innocence and his nobility, all while standing next to a betrayer. Brabantio is livid, but he can't do anything to Othello, because Othello's just been summoned. But Brabantio is going to go ahead and follow along with Othello and make his case to the Duke. Brabantio's case hinges upon the fact that he feels Othello has bewitched his daughter, used magic to entrance her. After all, there's no way a young white girl in her right mind would ever marry this old black man. "O thou foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter? Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her. For I'll refer me to all things of sense, if she in chains of magic were not bound. Whether a maid so tender, fair, and happy, so opposite to marriage that she shunned the wealthy curled darlings of our nation, would ever have, to incur a general mock, run from her guardage to the sooty bosom of such a thing as thou, to fear, not to delight." He's sure that Othello has used magic or drugs to seduce Desdemona. After all, she didn't pursue any of the young men in her own town, but since we've had a glance at Roderigo, we can kind of see why. Instead, she chose the Black Othello, something that Brabantio can't get his mind around. Brabantio wants to arrest him then and there, but instead must go before the Duke. In scene 3, before the Duke, we have not only Othello's summons to war, but we also have his trial from Brabantio. Brabantio charges in and demands justice before they move to matters of state. He says, "She is abused, stolen from me, and corrupted by spells and medicines bought of mountebanks, for nature so preposterously to err, being not deficient, blind, or lame of sense, sans witchcraft could not. There is no way she would like that guy unless she were deficient, blind, or lame of sense." The Duke is ready to defend Brabantio until he hears that it's Othello at fault. And so they calmly ask Othello to explain himself. Othello says that yes, he has married Desdemona, but not by use of any trickery, or any drugs, or any magics. My very noble and approved good masters, that I have ta'en away this old man's daughter. It is most true. True, I have married her. The very head and front of my offending hath this extent no more. Brabantio goes on to say that it would be impossible for his daughter to fall in love with what she feared to look on. And he goes on to say, it's against all rules of nature, and must be driven to find out practices of cunning hell why this should be. The Duke summons Desdemona to clear everything up, and Othello explains how Desdemona fell in love with him. The fact was, he visited often their house, at her father's invitation. And there he would tell stories of his adventures, of the wars he went through, of the places he visited, of the dangers he experienced. And Desdemona, listening to these at first, just in passing, but eventually more and more interested in, came to fall in love with Othello for who he was and where he had come from. Often did beguile her of her tears when I did speak of some distressful stroke that my youth suffered. My story being done, she gave me for my pains a world of sighs. She swore in faith 'twas strange, 'twas passing strange, 'twas pitiful, 'twas wondrous pitiful. She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me and bade me, if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint I spake. She loved me for the dangers I had passed, and I loved her that she did pity them. This only is the witchcraft I have used. So it was the story of himself that won Desdemona over. And at the end of his story, she even hints that if someone was in love with her and could tell such a wonderful story, they could win her heart. I mean, she's dropping hints pretty heavily there. She fell in love with him first, but not through any kind of magic. Much comment has been made of the fact that Othello's love for her comes from the fact that she loves him and his great story. Othello is this great war leader and great hero, and his greatness comes from his nobility in war so far. And it's Desdemona's affirmation of that, the way that she supports that, that makes him love her. The Duke, after hearing Othello's story, has sided with Othello. He even says, I think this tale would win my daughter too. On top of that, when Desdemona arrives, Brabantio asks her where her duty lies. Where most you owe obedience? And Desdemona answers, in a similar fashion to Cordelia in King Lear, that although she owe her father allegiance, she owe her husband more, as is normal and natural. Once he hears this, Brabantio throws up his hands and gives her up. I am glad at soul I have no other child, for thy escape would teach me tyranny to hang clogs on them. I have done, my lord. The Duke turns and asks Othello if he will go to war for them against the Turks, and Othello agrees, but also asks that Desdemona be able to come with him. After all, things are pretty uncomfortable back at home with her father now, and it's better that his wife stay close to him. And everything seems to be resolved, and rather fairly, except that Brabantio is still angry. And as he leaves, he says to Othello, look to her more, if thou hast eyes to see. She has deceived her father, and may thee. Up to this point, Desdemona has been perfectly faithful, and very pure and innocent. Here her love for Othello has overcome her duty to her father, and so her marriage to Othello is a kind of rebellion against her father's wishes. Yet Brabantio's final judgment here of her casts her as an unfaithful woman. Othello, however, has complete trust in her faithfulness. He says, my life upon her faith. I trust her faithfulness with my life. Othello must leave Desdemona in the hands of Iago and his wife until she can be carried out to the camp. And everyone exits except for Roderigo and Iago. Roderigo is in complete despair. Things did not go according to his plan, and now he just wants to cry himself to death and drown himself. Iago gives him a few nudges and says, you'll be fine, everything will work out, don't worry, she'll get tired of him after a little while and she'll be ready for you. As usual, Iago is very crude, using a lot more animal imagery, that bestiality of Iago. He repeatedly tells Roderigo to fill his purse. Get you some money and give it to me and I'll take care of everything for you. No need to be sad, I'll make this work out for you. Don't you worry, we just have to be patient. He says of Desdemona, it is merely a lust of the blood and permission of the will. She must change for youth. When she is sated with his body, she will find the error of her choice. She must have change, she must, therefore put money in thy purse. Roderigo's cheered up and walks away, and Iago turns and has his villain soliloquy. which ends Act 1. Iago frequently throughout this play turns to the audience and has a soliloquy, and we get to see into his mind and hear his clever plans. He seems to delight in expressing them, in exploring them, in thinking them through and talking them through with the audience. And here he has his idea how to truly destroy Othello. Up till now, he's just been messing around, trying to make Othello miserable, but now he's really going to mess things up. I hate them more, and it is thought abroad that twixt my sheets has done my office. I know not if it be true, yet I, from mere suspicion in that kind, will do as if for surety. He holds me well, the better shall my purpose work on him. Cassio is a proper man. Let me see now. To get his place, and to plume up my will in double knavery. How? Let's see. After some time to abuse Othello's ear that he is too familiar with his wife, he hath a person in a smooth, disposed to be suspected, framed to make women false. And the more is of a free and open nature that thinks men honest, that but seem to be so, and will as tenderly be led by the nose as asses are. I have it. It is engendered. Hell and night must bring this monster of birth to the world's light. He's downright creepy. Notice his next excuse for hating Othello. His first reason was the Passover for the promotion. The second here is the fact that there was at least at one time a rumor that Othello had done something with Iago's wife. Iago doesn't even think this is true. It's the most ridiculous accusation ever, probably stemming simply from the racial issue. However, just the thought that such a rumor could possibly ever exist is enough to drive him to destroy Othello. And how is he going to do that? He's going to stir up jealousy between Othello and Cassio, make it look like Cassio's been getting with Desdemona, and infuriate Othello to the point of all of their destruction. End of the exposition, end of Act 1. I'll see you next time as we look at Act 2, when Iago begins to put the pieces of his plan into play. What's going to happen when Othello goes to war? What's going to happen when Iago starts manipulating Cassio and Othello? We'll see. I'll see you next time.